Is this some kind of sick joke? I thought you came to kill me.
What?
I'm prepared to face the consequences of my betrayal.
What are you... What the...
You're a man?
Okay, I know this looks bad, but I promise there's a lore explanation for why the President of the United States grabbed this guy's junk.
Okay, so basically this guy, Jack, was sent in by the government to rescue the president, who was being held hostage by bad people on this offshore plant.
You're nothing but a common criminal, and that's the only way people will ever remember you. Oh, damn you! I'm an ox!
However, Jack doesn't know that the president was secretly in league with the shadow government who are controlling America behind the scenes. The president betrayed the shadow government, however, when he teamed up with this guy, who was the former president, to gain power. Only his plan backfired. Now, he was expecting to be executed by a female assassin sent by the shadow government. And so when Jack shows up to rescue him, the president mistakes him for a woman. So he then grabbed his crotch to verify that this guy was not, in fact, the assassin.
I still don't get it.
Also because...
It's just a joke.
What are you...
Oh, I get it!
This convoluted insanity is the charm of Metal Gear Solid. Written and directed by the world's second most prolific feat enjoyer, the Metal Gear series has always been sold as a playable spy action thriller. From an outside perspective, it's easy to see the series as a self-serious, intellectual narrative.
And yes, each Metal Gear game has a central theme that examines the relationship between global politics, war, and society.
And most of the games allude to or take place in the midst of real historical events. But Metal Gear has always had an element of theatricality that heightened the drama and made it an entertaining experience for players. That's part of what made Metal Gear Solid so influential. Its cinematic presentation applied through the medium of video games was groundbreaking. There were games that had cutscenes and voice acting before Metal Gear Solid, and then there were the games after. But fast forward 10 years into the 2000s, and big budget narrative driven games had become the norm. If you don't have a white dude with brown hair, preferably voice acted by Nolan North or Troy Baker, your game ain't Game of the Year, brah. You know the ones.
Bowser's castle should be just up ahead.
I thought I smelled something burning.
Focus M. Bowser's got the power stars and you know what that means.
Yeah, trouble.
But something that I notice in gaming discourse is that Metal Gear Solid isn't usually lumped into the same category as these other narrative-driven AAA games. This seems ironic given that Metal Gear Solid heavily inspired all of them. It's considered like the first cinematic game. Without having played the series, you would think it would have the same trappings that largely went on to be mocked by gamers of today.
So why is it that MGS usually isn't held to the same scrutiny as modern AAA titles? What was it that made Metal Gear Solid special? Oh, that's the title of the video.
If I could describe the first Metal Gear Solid in one word, it would be timeless.
That may seem ironic for a number of reasons.
The potato faces of its characters that bob up and down, the very 80s action movie dialogue, even the gameplay mechanics and progression system are not perfect. But I think that these quirks are greater than the sum of their parts. As a whole, MGS1 is the perfect time capsule of games in the late 90s and what they aim to achieve. To be higher budget, story-driven, polygonal blockbusters that adhere to arcade-like game design. Minus the higher budget part.
What the hell is this?
I think this is still a pretty good standard for AAA titles to aspire to be. MGS is full of iconic characters and moments with a bold narrative that goes places few games dare to go in its time. But I think what often goes underappreciated is its simple yet inventive gameplay. It's a huge factor in what distinguishes it from modern mainstream titles and what keeps me coming back. MGS1's top-down perspective evokes the look of older RPGs and even classic arcade games like Pac-Man. Just like in those games, you are navigating through a maze of enemies with the simple objective of not getting caught. The characters in the game make some fuss about the Genome Army being this enhanced next generation of super soldiers. In reality though, the guards of MGS1 are quite predictable. Enemy AI relies on static walk cycles that are exploitable through simple observation. They will home in on your position when they spot you, but even then, alert statuses can be easily avoided once you know what you're doing. Add on top of that the usually present vision cones in the radar, and the challenge of the gameplay could seem trivial, but in practice, the game is asking more of the player than just that. The levels present trapdoors, hidden laser triggers, mines, and a few other environmental hazards, that wouldn't be avoidable without frequent observation of the 3D environment. As a result, the gameplay feels like a heightened game of cat and mouse, where you are switching your view between the two sources of visual information to avoid death. It's not too different from something you might play at an arcade, the only difference being that the levels are separated by flirty 5-minute Zoom calls about nuclear proliferation.
I just didn't expect a world-class designer of military technology to be so cute. It's your eyes.
And they're rookie's eyes, right?
No, they're beautiful, compassionate eyes. First I'm strip searched by Dr. Naomi here, and then all my weapons are taken away.
Well, if you make it back in one piece, maybe I'll let you do a strip search on me.
You're 80 years old.
Oh, I'm still a man. And I get older and older, but the women I desire remain young. Natural, right?
Over-reliance on the radar is tested on the game's hard mode, where the vision cones aren't available and environmental observation is even more crucial. This radarless approach would be adopted in normal playthroughs for the later entries in the series. Admittedly, in the first game, it doesn't feel as though it was designed with this limitation in mind. Even though I had my frustrations with this difficulty mode, I actually felt more like a top stealth operative without the radar. I relied on the slick camera angles by sticking to the wall to view enemies around corners and utilize more distractions to manipulate AI. The game presents itself as a cautionary look into the not-so-distant future with a high-stakes thriller plot, and ironically the gameplay is a cute, mini sandbox of hide-and-seek. I would argue that the disparity between these two elements is a big draw for many people. MGS1 and the series as a whole wears this self-known absurdity as a badge of honor. In a word, it's camp. And that is the first key element in what makes Metal Gear Solid special. It is one of the most profound yet campy game series out there. Be it the characters, cutscenes, and even the gameplay.
The important thing is that you choose life. And then laugh.
This might be a turnoff for some, but I think the sillier, more video gamey elements aren't immersion breaking so much as they are heightening the more poignant parts of the game. This sentiment is reflected in a 1997 developer interview where Kojima discussed his intended tone for the game. You could say I want to show in a realistic way the fear and dread of war. It would suck the fun out of the game if I pushed that to the forefront though. You've got to have an entertaining side, like a Hollywood action movie. It's got to be fun as a game, and the intrigue of the world should gradually pull you in more and more. And by the ending credits, you should be left with something to think about. The setting of the game itself is another great example of this. The fact that it's a nuclear disposal facility is pretty heavy stuff for a game publisher to be signing off on in the late 90s. You have to remember that most of the popular games of the time were pure escapist fantasies. And given the setting, it was prime real estate for the writers to explore controversial real-life topics in history. In spite of this, the level design is really the opposite of that. It's a fun stealth obstacle course with challenges unique to each room of the facility. Areas that restrict you from using weapons, closed puzzle spaces filled with gas, the whole Vulcan Raven boss arena being a thrilling cat and mouse chase. Nearly every room is engaging and memorable, in spite of the oppressive backdrop of the game. MGS1 laid the groundwork for what the series is and what it would represent. Ingenuity in presentation, narrative, and gameplay, while making pee-pee-poo-poo jokes and saying,
You should be happy you've got enough free time to play a game. Enjoy yourself, okay?
Then the next game was like, okay, but what if the president also made the pee-pee-poo-poo jokes?
What are you?
Although the series' later entries would delve into the past, the earlier Metal Gear games were often set in the near future. The first two Metal Gear games were each set about a decade ahead of their actual release date, and 1998's Metal Gear Solid was set in 2005. All three of these games had their own fictionalized canon of world politics. At the time of their respective releases, this included both the Cold War and post-Cold War eras. Looking into the future meant that each game would also feature sci-fi technology. Portable remote missiles, a radar that detects and visualizes enemy positions in real time, nuclear-equipped mechs that scream like dinosaurs,
Nanomachines, son!
It was all partly inspired by real military tech and sci-fi technology that would eventually become reality in one way or another. Each game of this era served as a piece of speculative fiction, and this is where MGS2 went a step further. I said MGS1 was timeless, and I would describe MGS2 as timely. MGS2 was released during an era of significant and rapid hardware progression. Unlike the rendering comparisons of today, you don't need an explanation to recognize how this looks more advanced than this. The early 2000s was also a golden era for gameplay experimentation in high-budget games. There are games that look visually impressive, and there are games that try to do new things. Rarely are they paired together as often as games were during this golden era. MGS2 is the perfect example of this. It took full advantage of new hardware to expand the series' foundation in new immersive ways. The environment became interactable with cover systems, hanging under patrolled paths, and hiding bodies to avoid suspicion. First-person aiming was now available, allowing for shooting specific body parts for different effects. Guards now patrolled and communicated more as a squad of trained soldiers with coordinated progression in search tactics. The jump in hardware facilitated an unprecedented leap in realistic AI behavior and world simulations at a level that modern-day gaming advancements just can't compare to. This amount of immersive detail was simply not feasible with prior tech, and MGS2 released at the right place and right time to represent the realism now possible with the advancements of the 21st century. Tonally though, MGS2 was more focused on surrealism. This is where Metal Gear started getting weird.
Please! These gays! They're trying to murder me!
So much bizarre, eerie shit happens in this game that the writers directly tell you at the end, hey, that was pretty crazy. Just don't think about it too hard, it's just vibes.
What am I supposed to believe in? What am I going to leave behind when I'm through? Who am I really?
I don't know.
I wasn't old enough to experience it myself, but I imagine that the turn of the new century marked a new beginning for the age of technology, out with analog and in with digital.
A lot of media during this time frame began reflecting this cultural shift with themes focused on the frightening accuracy and detached nature of computer simulations. The idea that humanity advancing itself into the digital age was a sort of Faustian bargain, with us giving up a piece of our souls for the sake of technological progress.
MGS2 was similar in this aspect with its recurring theme of artificiality. The characters treat the events of the game as a calculated, predestined program that can't be changed. A lot of the game focuses on the digital domain, and this makes sense when you remember how the real world was being impacted by it.
MGS2 was released a year after Y2K, one of the largest and first of many digital crises of the 21st century. In real life, governments and businesses around the world made adjustments to hardware and software to mitigate the potential damage. In MGS2, it's explained in-universe that the spooky shadow government distributed a software patch to fix this issue, unbeknownst to everyone that it also included undetectable spyware.
Their plan was to activate this to monitor and control the flow of information on the internet. This continues to be a hot-button issue in real life 25 years later, with data privacy being both protected and violated by our own governments.
I don't see it talked about enough, but the fact that this game's release was mere weeks removed from the passing of the Patriot Act is eerily fitting. In case you're not familiar, the Patriot Act was passed by US Congress the month after 9/11 to enhance the surveillance capabilities of law enforcement and government agencies, like the NSA. Not much was officially known about what information was being gathered, only that it was being done under the pretense of stopping crime and terrorism. It wasn't until over a decade later when a former NSA contractor, Edward Snowden, leaked solid proof of what the government was doing. Among many other revelations, it was leaked that the act had enabled a collection of both global and US citizens' phone call records, medical history, personal finances, even what books they were borrowing from libraries.
Real quick, it's like 1 a.m. when I'm editing this video, and I found this 24-year-old forum of Snowden glazing MGS2. Kojima predicted that Snowden would become real-life Solid as Snake. This is insane.
So the US government does some pretty terrible stuff. What's new and what's my point? Well, remember that in 2001, the concept of the government using the stupid stuff we share on the internet to profile its own citizens was the plot of a PS2 game. This game has built a gradual and infamous legacy of quote-unquote predicting several future events and phenomena. Call it prophecy or just coincidence, but I think this serves as a testament to Kojima and his writing staff's ability to tap into what all great sci-fi storytellers have, a philosophical what-if mindset. The ability to map out future possibilities by using speculative settings to explore human and societal issues. The series is so effective at illustrating challenging topics through its own bizarre lens that it can end up depicting some uncomfortable modern realities. This is the second factor in what made Metal Gear Solid special. It was able to explore complex themes and make them accessible through its entertaining gameplay, storytelling, and directing. But yeah, most gamers didn't want to hear all that philosophical what-if shit in 2001. So MGS3 said, fuck all that, welcome to the jungle, baby.
Cut the boss.
Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater is probably the best all-around Metal Gear game.
There's a reason why this one is a fan favorite. 2 is my personal pick, but 2 also comes with a lot of baggage. MGS3 is different in that it works as a standalone title, and many fans play this one first for that reason. However, if you really want to have the best experience with this series, I would argue starting from MGS1 is still the best option. The reason for this is actually what I've been explaining thus far into the video. Each Metal Gear game since the start added and expanded upon a core element of the franchise. Appreciating what each game added in release order will further enhance your enjoyment as you play them. MGS1 introduced us to the core gameplay and wackiness of the series. MGS2 then added more complex AI, stealth maneuvers, and further pushed the boundaries of the hardware and video game storytelling. And so, MGS3 contains all these elements while evolving the gameplay to new heights with its increased layers of interactivity.
The first thing to talk about with Snake Eater is that it's the first game in the series to touch grass.
Metal Gear up until this game had been set in tight interior spaces, but this is 1964 and buildings didn't exist yet. Everyone rolled around in the dirt, ate raw meat, and had to use cigars to remove leeches. Rations are rare in this game, and your survival rests on capturing animals and patching yourself up when injured. And that food in your bag will spoil, so if you wait just a few days to jump back in, too bad.
All the McDonald's food are gone.
The gameplay moves at a slower pace to compensate for the increased level of management and awareness now expected of the player. The average level in Snake Eater is way bigger than even some of the largest areas of prior entries.
Enemies no longer have vision cones on display and react more realistically to your presence.
Snake Eater's design is more survival stealth sandbox than meticulously structured metallic mazes. There are several areas that come to mind, like the cabin in the woods, the Granin Design Bureau, Groznygrad Base, and even the mountainside being patrolled by the helicopter. By the way, did you know that you can actually prevent the helicopter from spawning here? Earlier in the game at Bolshaya Base, pay attention and you'll see that same helicopter. Blow it up and it won't show up later. Even the cutscenes tease the player to pay attention through the first-person prompts. Most of these are just fun new perspectives, but some of them actually contain useful hints and surprises. This game also has one of the most unique boss fights ever, the end.
This guy alone is a perfect example of how Kojima Productions just went nuts with the amount of gameplay possibilities in this game.
If you haven't played this game yet, you seriously owe it to yourself to play it before I spoil, so thanks for watching, go play Snake Eater. Anyways, there's basically 2 gimmick methods to beat him, and the really engaging way to take him down. The first is to shoot him here, like that's it. It's just a cute little thing, you know, just don't get hit by the... The next requires some more out-of-the-box thinking. The game relies on your console or PC's internal clock to determine in-game events, like the food spoiling I mentioned earlier. And this dude is older than all of our future presidential candidates combined. So if you set your clock forward just a few weeks...
Drop your weapon!
But the fun way to take him out is just to do the actual boss fight. It helps that it's spread across different areas and plays out like an intense game of hide and seek. It's just a quiet, anxious chase to use your tools and awareness to spot him before he gets you.
Freeze.
This boss fight is definitely one of the highlights of the entire series, but it was supposed to be even crazier.
Kojima has stated that he originally intended for this boss to last weeks, as he wanted to reflect how a real-life sniper duel would play out. Ultimately, the designers told him this is not possible, and admittedly, I'm not sure how fun that really could have been. But I think that unconventional yet admirable philosophy still shines through in the approach to the actual fight and within other aspects of the game. You get the sense while playing that the team wanted to take risks and experiment with new mechanics that evolved the core gameplay loop. This is what made Snake Eater and the series so special. The developers provided players with an intricate level of interactivity. If you think you can do something with the tools given to you, chances are the game designers put that in, along with 5 other uses you didn't think about. The games reward players who try new approaches and test harebrained use cases of items and techniques. Now, if I could just get a hold of these damn CQC controls, then I'll be cracked at this game. Maybe the Master Collection or Delta made these easier. I'll likely try those at some point. Okay, so I talked about MGS 1 through 3. What about the games after them? Well, I have my own thoughts on them, and I think they do some things really well and other things not so much. I didn't even mention the MSX games, since for one, I'm a fake fan that hasn't played them. But 2, it's because for me, the first 3 solid games really defined the series' identity. I truly think that these 3 games embodied the spirit that made the franchise unique from every other AAA cinematic game series. The games are high budget and are marketed as blockbuster experiences, but they're also goofy and have oodles of personal touch by their director. They aren't just surface level action games and dive headfirst into some uncomfortable history and end up saying something about our modern reality. And they don't forget that at the end of the day, they are video games. They are supposed to present us with engaging experiences through unique design and gameplay mechanics.
The impact these games left just can't be replicated today. There are still many great games being released, and they will leave their own legacies. But the Metal Gear Solid trilogy heightened standards during an experimental phase of the games industry, and we still haven't seen anything quite like them since.
The trilogy didn't follow trends, and the team behind these games had a specific vision they focused and delivered on. It's for that reason that these games aren't for everyone. Don't get me wrong, these are still popular games and have some universal themes and messages. But they are also kinda experimental and deeply weird in both story and gameplay. But for the longtime fans who have played them, you know the memories you have with them are special. And to the people who haven't played them, know that this is the kind of series that could change your life. I am not even being dramatic. In the words of the late and great David Lynch,
"Those who don't know, they don't know. Those who know, they enjoy."
Video over, now go play these games until we get Metal Gear Solid 6.